안녕하세요. 잠들입니다. 네, 오늘도 아름다운 하루입니다. 이 하루의 마지막 함께 할 수 있어서 감사합니다. 네, 토토리님 안녕하세요. 네, 안녕하세요. 잘 오셨어요. 네, 지금 어디 계시든 굿모닝, 굿애프터눈, 그리고 굿이브닝입니다. 네, 너구리님 오늘도 꿀잠 잘게요. 감사합니다. 네, 잘 오셨고요. 환영합니다. 꿀잠 주무시길 응원하겠습니다. 네, 다들 좋은 하루 보내셨길 바라면서 저번에 읽어드린 화요일, 목요일에 영어로 계속 낭독을 해드리고 있는데요. 데미안을 계속 낭독을 해드리려고 합니다. 지금까지 1장, 2장, 그리고 3장, 4장에 걸쳐서요. 오늘은 아마 5장, 그리고 6장이 되지 않을까 싶은데요. 진행하면서 5장 딱 한 장에서 끝날 수도 있고 아니면 5장, 6장 이렇게 할 수도 있고요. 지금까지 읽어드린 내용을 짧게 요약하자면요. 이제 1장, 2장에서는요. 이 작품의 나레이터 싱클레어가 내면의 갈등을 겪는, 삶에서 처음 그런 내면의 갈등을 겪는 그런 위기가 찾아옵니다. 뭐냐면 학교가 아니죠. 학교 바깥에서 다른 아이들이랑 놀다가 일진이랑 어울리게 되는 일이 있습니다. 일진한테 거짓말을 해서 내가 이렇게 용기가 있는 사람이다 라고 어떤 사람의 사과나무에서 나무 사과를 엄청 훔쳤다고 그렇게 자랑을 하죠. 근데 그것 때문에 아니나 다를까 꼬리가 붙잡히고 만달까요? 이 일진이 너 그래? 나 그러면은 이 사람한테 말하면 이 사과나무 주인이 나한테 돈 줄 건데 너 나한테 뭐 해줄 거야? 말 안 하려면. 그때부터 이제 고생길이 환하죠. 근데 그렇게 고생하는 도중에 데미안이라는 친구가 전학을, 이 라틴어 사립학교, 굉장히 고등학교인데 거기에 전학을 오게 됩니다. 전학 온 데미안은 어디서 왠지 모르게 나이에 비해 어른스러운 느낌이 나요. 뭘 하든 사람들의 주목을 받고, 데미안은 사실 싱클레어, 이 작품의 나레이터보다 나이가 몇 살 많습니다. 근데 이제 한국이 아니라 외국이기 때문에 독일이 배경이겠죠? 나이가 조금 많아도 이제 친구 먹는 게 조금 더 수월한가 봅니다. 하여간 그래서 데미안이랑 싱클레어랑 친분이 조금 쌓이면서 데미안이 일진을 물리쳐줘요. 그리고 싱클레어는 해방된 상태로 이제 학교를 졸업하게 되죠. 학교를 졸업하고 이제 그게 고등학교 비슷한 학교였나 봅니다. 대학교로 이제 각각 서로 갈라지게 되는데요. 그 뒤로 싱클레어는 데미안과 왕래가 별로 없고 본인의 대학에서 공부를 열심히 하는 게 아니라 술 마시는 길로, 술을 많이 마시고 하여간 방탕의 길로 접어듭니다. 그러는 와중에 한 여자와, 동경하는 여자와 사랑에 빠지고, 말이 사랑에 빠졌다지 혼자 짝사랑한 거죠. 그렇게 돼서 그걸 계기로 다시 정신을 차리고 공부를 잘 하게 됩니다. 근데 그 와중에 그림을 그리는 취미를 갖게 되는데, 이제 이 그림을 그리면서 본인의 내면에 대한 어떤 본인 스스로에 대한 자아를 마주치게 되는 그런 장면이 4장의 끝이었던 것 같습니다. 그 예로 이제 싱클레어는 본인이 그때까지 사랑하던 이름을 뭐라고 지었었죠? 기억이 안 난다. 하여간 그 짝사랑하는 여자한테 이름도 안 물어보고 본인이 그냥 이름을 지어줬어요. 근데 그림으로 이 여자를 그리겠다 해서 그때부터 그림을 그리기 시작했는데 어쩌다 보니까 이제 내 마음대로 그림을 그리다 보니까 딱 내 마음에 들 때 보니까 이게 왠지 낯익은데 누군지 모르겠는 거죠. 그래서 고민하다가 어느 날 떠오릅니다. 나는 데미안의 얼굴을 그렸다. 근데 또 더 고민하다 보니까 아니다. 이건 데미안이 아니라 내 모습이다. 내 내면의 모습이다. 뭐 이런 약간 프로이트나 칼 융의 이제 무의식의 약간 그런 것과 비슷한 계열의 무의식의 자아를 나타내주는 그런 장면이었던 것 같습니다. 사장은 좀 이제 그러한 깊은 내면에 대한 심볼리즘이 많이 있어서요. 제가 정확하게 요약하기는 조금 어려움이 있는데요. 네, 일단 큰 맥락은 그런 것 같습니다. 그래서 그때부터 이제 그때 딱 끊어지고 5장부터는 어떻게 이어질지 네, 저도 궁금한데요. 네, 아모스님 안녕하세요. 요즘엔 덕분에 인면이 좋습니다. 네, 안녕하세요. 잘 오셨습니다. 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 감사하고요. 네, 좋네요. 좋은 소식입니다. 네, 만다링님 안녕하세요. 베아트리체요. 맞아요. 제가 영어로 읽을 때는 비아트리스라고 읽었는데요. 네, 그게 싱클레어가 어떻게 보면 좀 웃기죠. 이름도 안 물어보고 그냥 본인이 이름을 지어버렸다니. 네, 만다랭님 감사합니다. 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 감사하고요. 만다랭님이 데미안 전문가십니다. 네, 감사합니다. SSYYJ님 안녕하세요. 잠들 준비 완. 네, 환영합니다. 잘 오셨고요. 그대로 이불 안에서 꿈나라로 직진하시길 바라겠습니다. 네, 그러면 이제 추가로 얘기 없이 낭독을 시작하도록 할게요. 물을 몇 모금 마시고 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Demian, Chapter 5. The bird fights its way out of the egg. My painted dream bird was on its way, searching out my friend. An answer came to me in the most curious manner. In my classroom in school, I found at my desk, in the interval between 2 lessons, a piece of paper slipped between the pages of my book. It was folded in the manner we used for passing notes to one another in class. I wondered who could have sent me such a note, as I was not so intimate with any of the boys that one of them should wish to write to me. I thought it was a summons to participate in some school rag or other, in which, however, I should not have taken part, and I replaced the note unopened in my book. During the lesson, it fell by chance into my hands again. I toyed with the paper, unfolded it without thinking, and discovered a few words written thereon. I threw a glance at the writing. One word riveted my attention. Terrified, I read on, while my heart seemed to become numb with a sense of destiny. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever will be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The name of the God is Abraxas. I sank into deep meditation after I had read the words through several times. It admitted of no doubt this was Demian's answer. None could know of the bird except our two selves. He had received my picture. He had understood and helped me to explain its significance. But where was the connection in all this? And what worried me above all? What did Abraxas mean? I had never read or heard of the word. The name of the god is Abraxas. The hour passed without my hearing anything of the lesson. The next lesson began, the last of the morning. It was taken by quite a young assistant master, fresh from the university, to whom we had already taken a liking, because he was young and pretended to no false dignity with us. We were reading Herodotus under Dr. Fallen's guidance. This was one of the few school subjects which interested me. But this time my attention wandered. I had mechanically flung open my book, but I did not follow the translation and remained lost in thought. For the rest, I had already several times had the experience that what Demian had said to me in the confirmation class was right. If you willed a thing strongly enough, it happened. If during the lesson I was deeply immersed in thought, I need not fear that the master would disturb my peace. Certainly, if you were absent-minded or sleepy, then he stood suddenly there. That had already happened to me several times. But if you were really thinking, if you were genuinely sunk in thought, then you are safe. And I had already put to the test what he had said to me about fixing a person with one's eyes. When at school with Demian, I had never been successful in this attempt. But now I often realize that you could accomplish much simply by a fixed look and deep thinking. So, I was sitting now, my thoughts far from Herodotus and school. But the master's voice unexpectedly fell on my consciousness like a thunder crash, so that I started with fright. I listened to his voice. He was standing quite close to me, I thought. He had already called me by name. But he did not look at me. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I heard his voice again. Loudly, the word Abraxas fell from his lips. Continuing his explanation, the beginning of which had escaped me, Dr. Fallen said, "We must not imagine the ideas of those sects and mystical corporations of antiquity to be as naive as they appear from the standpoint of a rationalistic outlook. Antiquity knew absolutely nothing of science, in our sense of the word. On the other hand, more attention was paid to truths of a philosophical, mystical nature, which often attained to a very high stage of development. Magic in part arose therefrom, and often led to fraud and crime. But nonetheless, magic had a noble origin and was inspired by deep thought. So it was with the teaching of Abraxas, which I have just cited as an example. This name is used in connection with Greek charm formulas. Many opinions coincide in thinking it is the name of some demon of magic, such as some savage people worship today. But it appears that Abraxas had a much wider significance. We can imagine the name to be that of a divinity on whom the symbolical task was imposed of uniting the divine and the diabolical. The learned little man continued his discourse with much seriousness. No one was very attentive, and as the name did not recur, I was soon immersed in my own thoughts again. To unite the divine and the diabolical rang in my ears. Here was a starting point. I was familiar with that idea from my conversations with Demian in the very last period of our friendship. Demian told me then, we had indeed a God whom we revered, but this God represented part of this world only, the half which was arbitrarily separated from the rest. It was the official, permitted, bright world. But one should be able to hold the whole world in honor. One should either have a God who was at the same time a devil, or one should institute devil worship together with worship of God. And now, Abraxas was the God. He was at the same time God and devil. For a long time, I zealously sought to follow up the trail of ideas further, without success. In addition, I rummaged through a whole library to find out more about Abraxas, but in vain. However, it was not my nature to concentrate my energies on a methodical search after knowledge, a search which would reveal truths of a dead, useless, documentary kind. The figure of Beatrice, which had for a certain time occupied so much of my attention, vanished by degrees from my mind, or rather receded slowly, drawing nearer and nearer to the horizon, becoming paler, more like a shadow as it retreated. She satisfied my soul no longer. A new spiritual development now began to take place in the dreamy existence I led, this existence in which I was strangely wrapped up in myself. The longing for a full life glowed in me, or rather the longing for love. The sex instinct, which for a time had been merged into my worship of Beatrice, required new pictures and aims. Fulfillment was denied me, and it was more impossible than ever for me to delude myself by expecting anything of the girls who seemed to have the happiness of my comrades in their keeping. I again dreamed vividly, even more by day than by night. Images presented themselves to me. Desires in the shape of pictures rose up in my imagination, withdrawing me from the outside world, so that my relations with these pictures, with these dreams and shadows, were more real and more intimate than with my actual surroundings. A certain dream, a play of fantasy which recurred to me, was full of significance. This dream, the most important and the most enduring of my life, was as follows. I returned home. Over the front door shone the crest with a yellow bird on the blue ground. My mother came to meet me, but as I entered and wished to embrace her, it was not she, but a shape I had never before seen, tall and powerful, resembling Max Damian and my painting, yet different, and quite womanly in spite of its size. This figure drew me towards it and held me in a quivering, passionate embrace. Rapture and horror were mixed. The embrace was a sort of divine worship, and yet a crime as well. Too much of the memory of my mother, too much of the memory of Max Damian was contained in the form which embraced me. The embrace seemed repulsive to my sentiment of reverence, yet I felt happy. I often awoke out of this dream with a deep feeling of contentment, often with the fear of death and a tormenting conscience, as if I were guilty of a terrible sin. It was only gradually and unconsciously that I realized the connection between this mental picture and the hint which had come to me from outside concerning the God of whom I was in search. However, this connection became closer and more intimate, and I began to feel that precisely in this dream, this presentiment, I was invoking Abraxas. Rapture and horror, man and woman, the most sacred things and the most abominable interwoven, the darkest guilt with the most tender innocence. Such was the dream picture of my love. Such also was Abraxas. Love was no longer a dark animal impulse, as I had felt with considerable anxiety in the beginning. Neither was it a pious, spiritualized form of worship any longer, such as I had bestowed upon the picture of Beatrice. It was both and yet much more. It was the image of an angel and of Satan, man and woman in one, human being and animal, the highest good and lowest evil. It was my destiny. It seemed that I should experience this in my own life. I longed for it and was afraid of it. I followed it in my dreams and took to flight before it, but it was always there, was always standing over me. The next spring I was to leave school and go to some university to study, where and what I knew not. A small mustache grew on my lip. I was a grown man, and yet completely hopeless and aimless. Only one thing was firm, the voice in me, the dream picture. I felt it my duty to follow this guidance blindly. But it was difficult, and daily I was on the point of revolting. Perhaps I was mad, I often used to think. Perhaps I was not as other men, but I could do everything the others did. With a little pains and industry, I could read Plato. I could solve a trigonometrical problems, or work out a chemical analysis. Only one thing I could not do, discover the dark, concealed aim within me and make up my mind as others did. Others who knew well enough whether they wanted to be professors or judges, doctors or artists. They knew what career to follow and what advantages they would gain by it. But I was not like that. Perhaps I would be like them someday, but how was I to know? Perhaps I should have to seek and seek for years and would make nothing of myself, would attain no end. Perhaps I should attain an end, but it might be wicked, dangerous, terrible. I wanted only to try to live in obedience to the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? I often made the attempt to paint the powerful love figure of my dream, but I never succeeded. If I had been successful, I would have sent the picture to Demian. Where was he? I knew not. I only knew there was a bond of union between us. When should I see him again? The pleasant tranquility of those weeks and months of the Beatrice period was long since gone. I thought at that time I had reached a haven and had found peace. But it was ever so. Scarcely did I begin to adapt myself to circumstances, scarcely had a dream done me good, when it faded again. In vain to complain. I now lived in a fire of unstilled desires, of tense expectation, which often rendered me completely wild and mad. I frequently saw before me the picture of my dream mistress with extraordinary clearness, much more clearly than I saw in my own hand. I spoke to it, wept over it, cursed it. I called it mother and knelt before it in tears. I called it my beloved and felt its ripe kiss of fulfilled desire. I called it devil and whore, vampire and murderer. It invited me to the tenderest dreams of love and to the most horrible abominations. Nothing was too good and precious for it, nothing too bad and vile. I passed the whole of that winter in a state of inward tumult, difficult to describe. I had long been accustomed to loneliness. That did not depress me. I lived with Demian, with the hawk, with my picture of the big dream figure which was my fate and my mistress. It sufficed to live in close communion with those things, since they opened up a large and broad perspective, leading to Abraxas. But I was not able to summon up these dreams, these thoughts at will. I could not invest them in colors as I pleased. They came of themselves, taking possession of me, governing me and shaping my life. I was secure, insofar as the outside world was concerned. I was afraid of no one. My schoolfellows had learned to recognize that, and observed a secret respect towards me, which often caused me to smile. When I wished, I could penetrate most of them with a look, thereby surprising them occasionally. Only, I seldom or never wanted to do this. It was my own self which occupied my attention, always myself. And yet, I longed ardently to live a bit of real life, to give something of myself to the world, to enter into contact and battle with it. Sometimes I wandered through the streets in the evening and could not, through restlessness, return home before midnight. I thought to myself, now I cannot fail to meet my beloved. I shall overtake her at the next corner. She will call to me from that next window. Sometimes all this seemed to torture me unbearably, and I was quite prepared to take my own life some day. At that time, I found a peculiar refuge, by chance, as one says. But really, such happenings cannot be attributed to chance. When a person is in need of something, and the necessary happens, this is not due to chance, but to himself. His own desire leads him compellingly to the object of which he stands in need. 2 or 3 times during my wanderings through the streets, I had heard the strains of an organ coming in from a little church in the suburbs, without, however, stopping to listen. The next time I passed by the church, I heard it again, and recognized that Bach was being played. I went to the door, which I found to be locked. As the street was practically empty, I sat down on a curbstone close to the church, turned up the collar of my coat and listened. It was not a large organ, but a good one nevertheless. Whoever was playing played wonderfully well, almost like a virtuoso, but with a peculiar, highly personal expression of will and perseverance, which seemed to make the music ring out like a prayer. I had the feeling that the man who was playing knew a treasure was shut up in the music, and he struggled and tapped and knocked to get at the treasure, as if his life depended on his finding it. In the technical sense, I did not understand very much about music, but this form of the soul's expression I have from my childhood intuitively understood. I feel music is something which I can comprehend without initiation. The organist next played something modern. It might have been Reger. The church was almost completely dark. Only a very narrow beam of light shone through the window nearest me. I waited until the end, and then walked up and down till the organist came out. He was still quite a young man, though older than myself, robust and thick-set. He walked quickly, taking powerful strides, but as if forcing the pace against his will. Many an evening thereafter I sat before the church, or walked up and down. Once I found the door open, and for half an hour I sat shivering and happy inside, while the organist played in the organ loft by the dim gaslight. Of the music he played, I heard not only what he himself put into it. There seemed also to be a secret coherence in his repertory. Each piece seemed to be the continuation of the one preceding. Everything he played was pious, expressing faith and devotion. But not pious like churchgoers and clergymen, not like pilgrims and beggars of the Middle Ages. Pious with a reckless surrender to a world feeling, which was superior to all confessions of faith. He frequently played music by the pre-Bach composers, and old Italian music, and all the pieces said the same thing, all expressed what the musician had in his soul. Longing. a longing to identify oneself with the world and to tear oneself free again, listening to the workings of one's own dark soul, an orgy of devotion and lively curiosity of the wonderful. I once secretly followed the organist as he left the church. He continued his way to the outskirts of the town and entered a little tavern. I could not resist the temptation to go in after him. For the first time, I had a clear view of him. He sat at the table in the corner of the little room, a black felt hat on his head, a measure of wine before him, and his face was just as I had expected it to be. It was ugly and somewhat uncouth, with the look of a seeker and of an eccentric, obstinate, and strong-willed, with a soft and childish mouth. The expression of what was strong and manly lay in the eyes and forehead. On the lower half of the face sat a look of gentleness and immaturity, rather effeminate, and showing a lack of self-mastery. The chin indicated a boyish indecision, as if in contradiction with the eyes and forehead. I liked the dark brown eyes, full of pride and hostility. Silently, I took my place opposite him. There was no one else in the tavern. He glared at me, as if he wished to chase me away. Nevertheless, I maintained my position, looking at him unflinchingly, until at last he growled testily. "What the deuce are you staring at me for? Do you want anything of me?" "I don't want anything," I said. "You have already given me much." He wrinkled his forehead. "Ah, you're a music enthusiast, are you? I think it's disgusting to go mad over music." I did not let myself be intimidated. "I have so often listened to your playing, there in the church," I said, "but I don't want to bother you. I thought perhaps I should discover something in you, something special. I don't know exactly what, but please don't mind me. I can listen to you in the church." "Why? I always lock the door." "Just lately you forgot, and I sat inside. Otherwise I stand outside or sit on the curbstone." "Is that so? Another time you can come inside. It's warmer. You've simply got to knock on the door, but loudly and not while I'm playing. Now, what did you want to say? But you're quite young, apparently a schoolboy or student. Are you a musician?" "No, I like music, but only the kind you play, absolute music, where one feels that someone is trying to fathom heaven and hell. I like music so much, I think, because it is not concerned with morals. Everything else is a question of morals, and I am looking for something different. Whatever has been concerned with morals has caused me only suffering. I don't express myself properly. Do you know that there must be a God who is at the same time God and devil? There must have been one. I have heard so." The organist pushed back his broad hat and shook the dark hair from his forehead. He looked at me penetratingly and bent forward his face towards me over the table. Softly and tensely he questioned, "What's the name of the God of whom you are talking?" "Unfortunately, I know practically nothing about him, really, only his name. His name's Abraxas." The musician looked distressfully around, as if someone might be eavesdropping. Then he bent towards me and said in a whisper, "I thought so. Who are you?" "I'm a student from the school." "How do you know about Abraxas?" "By chance." He thumped on the table so that his wine spilled over. "Chance? Don't talk nonsense, young man. One doesn't know of Abraxas by chance, mark you. I will tell you something more of him. I know a little about him." He ceased talking and pushed back his chair. I looked at him expectantly, and he made a grimace. "Not here. Another time. There, take these." He dug his hand into the pocket of his overcoat, which he had not taken off, and pulled out a couple of roasted chestnuts, which he threw to me. I said nothing. I took and ate them, and was very contented. Well, he whispered after a while, how do you know about him? I did not hesitate to tell him. I was lonely and perplexed, I related. I called to mind a friend of former years who, I think, knows a great deal. I had painted something, a bird coming out of a terrestrial globe. I sent this to him. After a time, when I had begun to lose hope of a reply, a piece of paper fell into my hands. On it was written, "The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever will be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God, and the name of the God is Abraxas." He answered nothing. We peeled our chestnuts and ate them, and drank our wine. "Shall we have another drink?" he asked. "Thanks, no. I don't care much for drinking." He laughed, somewhat disappointedly. "As you wish. I am different. I am staying here. You can go now." The next time I saw him after the organ recital, he was not very communicative. He conducted me through an old street to an old, stately house and upstairs into a large, somewhat gloomy and untidy room where, besides a piano, there was nothing to indicate that its occupant was a musician. Instead, a huge bookcase and writing table gave the room a somewhat scholarly air. "What a lot of books you have," I said appreciatively. "A part of them belongs to the library of my father, with whom I live." "Yes, young man, I live with my father and mother, but I cannot introduce you to them, as I and my acquaintances meet with but scant respect at home." "I am a prodigal son, you see. My father is very much looked up to. He is a well-known clergyman and preacher in this town. And I, to let you know at once, am his talented and promising son, who, however, is guilty of many backslidings, and to a certain extent mad. I was studying theology and deserted this worthy faculty shortly before my final examination, although really I am still in the same line as far as concerns my private studies. For me, it is still of the highest importance and interest what sort of gods people have invented for themselves at various times. I am a musician into the bargain, and shall soon get a post as organist, I think. Then I shall be in the church again. I glanced over the backs of the books and found Greek, Latin, Hebrew titles, as far as I could see by the feeble light of the lamp on the table. My acquaintance, meanwhile, had taken up a position on the floor in the dark by the wall. "Come here," he called after a while. "We will practice a little philosophy. That means keeping one's mouth shut, lying on one's stomach, and thinking." He struck a match and applied it to the paper and wood in the fire, in front of which he was lying. The flame leapt up. He poked and blew the fire with great skill. I lay down near him on the ragged carpet. I stared into the flames, which drew my attention as well, and we lay silent for perhaps a whole hour, stretched out in front of the flaring wood fire. We watched it flame and roar, die down and flicker up again, until finally it settled down into a subdued glow. Fire worship was not by any means the silliest form of worship invented, he murmured without looking up. Those were the only words spoken. With staring eyes I gazed into the fire, lulled by the tranquility of the room. I sank in dreams, seeing shapes in the smoke and pictures in the ashes. Once I started up, my companion had thrown a little bit of resin into the glow. A little slender flame shot up. I saw in it the bird with the golden hawk's head. In the glow which died away in the fireplace, Golden glittering threads wove themselves together into a net, letters and pictures, memories of faces, of animals, of plants, of worms and serpents. When I woke from my reveries and looked across at my companion, he was absorbed, staring at the ashes with the fixed gaze of a fanatic, his chin in his hands. "I must go now," I said softly. "Well, go then. Goodbye." He did not get up, and as the lamp had gone out, I had to feel my way across a dark room, through dark corridors and down the stairs, and so out of the enchanted old dwelling. Once in the street, I stopped and looked up at the house. In not one of the windows was a light burning. A little brass plate shone in the gleam of the glass lamp before the door. "Pistorius, Vicar," I read thereon. As I sat in my little room after supper, I remembered that I had learned nothing about Abraxas or anything else from Pistorius. We had scarcely exchanged 10 words, but I was quite contented with the visit I had paid him, and he had promised to play next time an exquisite piece of organ music, a Pascalia by Buxtehude. Without my having realized it, the organist Pistorius had given me a first lesson, as we lay on the floor in front of the fireplace of his melancholy hermit's room. Staring into the fire had done me good. It had confirmed and set in activity tendencies which I had always had, but had never really followed. Gradually and in part, I saw light on the subject. When quite a child, I had from time to time the propensity to watch bizarre forms of nature, not observing them closely, but simply surrendering myself to their peculiar magic, absorbed by the contemplation of their curling shapes, long dignified tree roots, colored veins in stone, flecks of oil floating on water, flaws in glass. All things of a similar nature had had great charm for me at that time. Above all, water and fire, smoke, clouds, dust, and especially the little circulating colored specks which I saw when I closed my eyes. In the days following my first visit to Pistorius, this began to come back to me. I noticed that I was indebted solely to staring into the open fire for a certain strength and pleasure, for the increase in my depth of feeling which I had felt since. It was curiously beneficial and enriching, dreaming and staring into the fire. To the few experiences I had gained on the road to the attainment of my proper ends in life was added this new one, the contemplation of such shapes, the surrendering of oneself to these irrational, twisting, odd forms of nature. Engenders in us a feeling of the harmony of our inner being with the will which brought forth these shapes. We soon feel the temptation to look upon them as our own creations, as if made by our own moods. We see the boundary between ourselves and nature waver and vanish. We learn to know the state of mind by outside impressions or by inward. In no way so simply and so easily as by this practice do we discover to what a great extent we are creators. To what a great extent our souls have part in the continual creation of the world. Or rather, it is the same indivisible Godhead which is active in us and in nature. If the outside world fell in ruins, one of us would be capable of building it up again. For mountain and stream, tree and leaf, root and blossom, all that is shaped by nature lies modeled in us, comes from the soul, whose essence is eternity, of whose essence we are ignorant, but which is revealed to us for the most part as love force and creative power. Many years later, I found this observation confirmed in a book, one of Leonardo da Vinci's, who in one passage remarks how good and deeply moving it is to look at a wall on which many people have spat. He felt the same sensation before those spots on the wet wall as Pistorius and I before the fire. At our next meeting, the organist enlightened me still further on the subject. We confine our personality within too much narrow bonds. We count as composing our person only that which distinguishes us as individuals, only that which we recognize as irregular. But we are made up from the entire world stock, each one of us, and just as in our body is displayed the genealogical table of development back to the fish stage and still further, so we have accumulated in our souls all the experiences through which a human soul has ever lived. All the gods and devils which have ever been, whether those of the Greeks or Chinese or Zulus, all are in us, are there as potentialities, as desires, as starting points. If all mankind died out, with the exception of a single moderately gifted child, who had not enjoyed the slightest instruction, so would this child rediscover the whole process of things. It would be able to produce gods, demons, paradises, the commandments and prohibitions, Old and New Testaments, everything. Well and good, I objected, but then what does the worth of the individual consist of? Why do we continue to strive if everything has already been achieved in us? Stop, exclaimed Pistorius vehemently. There is a great difference between whether one merely carries the world in oneself or whether one is conscious of that as well. A madman can have ideas which remind one of Plato, and a pious little boy in Moravian boarding school will recreate in his thought profound mythological ideas which occur in the Gnostics or in Zoroaster. But he does not realize it. He is a tree or a stone, at best an animal, as long as he does not know it. But when the first spark of this knowledge glimmers in him, he becomes a man. You will not consider all the two-legged creatures who walk out there in the street as human beings, simply because they walk erect and carry their young 9 months in the womb. Look how many of them are fish or sheep, worms or leeches. How many are ants or bees? Well, in reach of them are the possibilities of becoming human creatures, but only when they feel this. It is only when, if even in part, they learn to make them conscious, that these potentialities become theirs. Our conversations were somewhat after this style. They seldom taught me anything completely new, anything absolutely surprising, but all, even the most banal, hit like a light persistent hammer stroke on the same point in me. All helped to my development. All helped to peel off skins, to break up eggshells, and after each talk I held my head somewhat higher. I was more sure of myself, until my yellow bird pushed this beautiful bird of prey crest through the ruins of the world shell. We frequently related our dreams to one another. Pistorius knew how to interpret them. A curious example comes to my mind. I dreamed I was able to fly. I was flung through the air, so to speak, impelled by a great force over which I had not the mastery. The sensation of this flight was exhilarating, but soon changed to fear as I saw myself snatched up involuntarily to risky heights. There I made the saving discovery that I could control my rise and fall by arresting my breath and my breathing again. Pistorius interpreted as follows. The swing which sent you up into the air is a great property of mankind, which everyone possesses. It is the feeling of close relationship with the springs of every force, but it soon causes anxiety. It is cursedly dangerous. For that reason, Most people willingly renounce flying, preferring to walk according to prescribed laws along the footpath. But not you. You fly higher, as befits an intelligent fellow. And behold, you make a wonderful discovery there, namely, you gradually get the mastery over the impelling force. In other words, you acquire a fine little force of your own, an instrument, a rudder. That is splendid. Without that, one goes floating into the air without any will of one's own. Mad men, for instance, do that. They have deeper presentiments than the people on the footpath. But they have no key and no rudder. They fall whistling through the air, down into the fathomless depths. But you, Sinclair, you manage all right. And how, pray? You probably don't even know. You manage with a new instrument, with a breath regulator. And now you can see that your soul isn't really personal at bottom. I mean that you didn't invent this regulator. It isn't new, it is a loan. It has existed for thousands of years. It is the balancing organ fish have, the air bladder. Even today, we actually still have a few very rare kinds of fish whose air bladder is at the same time a sort of lung, and on occasion can use it to breathe with. In your dream, you made use of your lungs in exactly the same way as these fish do their air bladder. He even brought me a volume on zoology and showed me the original drawings of these ancient fish. And with a peculiar thrill, I felt an organ of early evolutionary epochs functioning in me. 네, 여기까지가 5장입니다. 굉장히 많은 내면의 묘사가 그 전장보다 더 많이 있는 것 같습니다. 네, 가을님, 안녕하세요. 네, 환영합니다. 잘 오셨어요. 생강님, 안녕하세요. 네, 잘 오셨습니다. 4장에 대해서 제가 요약할 때 까먹은 게 있는데요. 4장이 끝날 무렵에 제가 기억하기로는 이제 싱클레어가 그림을 계속 그리다가 하루는 자기 마음대로 그리는데 본인도 알아보지 못하는 그림이 있는 겁니다. 뭐냐면 옛날에 어린아이 때 집에 살던 그 정문에 있던 어떤 모양인데요. 모형체인데요. 그게 새의 모습인데 정확히는 알지 못합니다. 그래서 어쨌건 자기의 마음이 가는 대로 그림을 그리다가 보니까 이게 모양이 너무 뭔지 모르겠는 거죠. 그래서 그때까지도 왕래가 거의 끊겼던 데미안한테 그 데미안이 옛날에 살던 주소로 이 그림을 보내기로 결정합니다. 그리고 5장에서는 그렇게 보낸 그림인데요. 그림이 그 그림에 대해서 데미안이 과연 어떤 답장을 할까 그런 생각을 갖고 있었는데요. 데미안은 답장을 하지 않죠. 그래서 약간 실망을 하고 에라이 모르겠다 하고 그냥 살아가는데 어느 날 본인이 어떤 쪽지를 받게 됩니다. 근데 이 싱클레어는 이 쪽지를 보고 그냥 반 친구들이 뭐 놀러 가자 아니면 쓰잘데기 없는 얘기를 하려고 나한테 보낸 거겠거니 하고 열어보지도 않는데 어느 날 우연히 이걸 열어보게 됩니다. 그랬더니 그 쪽지에는 굉장히 깊은 문구가 담겨 있었어요. 그리고 이 문구가 뭐였는지 정확히 기억은 안 나지만 그 새에 대한 데미안의 해석이었습니다. 뭐냐면 새는 본인의 알을 뚫고 나아가야 한다. 무너뜨려야 하는 그 알은 이 세상이다. 그리고 이 세상을 무너뜨림으로써 진정한 신에게 닿을 수 있다. 삶의 진정한 목적을 찾을 수 있다. 그 신의 이름은 아브렉세스이다. 뭐 그런 내용이었던 것 같아요. 물론 이것도 제가 대충 이렇게 그냥 기억으로 말씀드리는 거긴 한데, 그래서 이 글귀를 갖고 굉장히 고민을 합니다. 5장에서 싱클레어가 이 아브렉서스라는 신의 이름이 뭔지 도저히 모르겠는 거죠. 지금까지 있었던 이 책의 내용에서 가장 중요한 주제 중 하나는 우리가 인위적으로 생각하는 선과 악의 세계, 그리고 특히나 이 시대, 이 나라에서는 기독교가 주 종교였기 때문에 그걸 기독교의 특정한 기준을 갖고 해석하는 이 사회에서 악이라는 세상엔 종교, 기독교가 그 당시의 기독교 문화가 받아들이지 않는 악의 모습을 어떻게 바라볼 것인가, 거기에 대한 깊은 질문, 깊은 내면의 갈등을 계속 갖고 있는 것. 그게 큰 주제 중 하나라고 생각하는데요. 어쨌건 여기에 대해서 깊은 고민을 하게 됩니다. 싱클레어는. 이 아브렉서스라는 신이 도대체 어떤 신인가. 그래서 이래저래 고민하다가 어느 날 걸어가는 도중에 한 교회에서 음악 소리가 나오는 걸 들어요. 오르간에서 나오는 음악인데 바흐의 음악을 듣습니다. 그리고 이 바흐는 싱클레어가 어릴 때 매우 가장 좋아하던 작곡가이죠. 어쨌건 그래서 듣다가 너무 좋아서 자주 그 교회 근방에 와서 그냥 앉아서 음악을 듣곤 합니다. 그리고 그 오르간을 연주하는 연주자의 뒷모습도 따라가 보고 누구인지 보고, 그리고 어느 날 드디어 그 연주자한테 인사를 할 기회가 오죠. 주점이라고 할까요? 뭐 술 마시는 데에서 인사를 합니다. 근데 이 연주자는 딱히 성격이 좋은 사람 같지는 않습니다. 그럼에도 싱클레어는 이제 계속 어, 참을성 있게 이 사람과 대화를 하죠. 그러다가 본인의 깊은 내면의 갈등을 되게 아무것도 아닌 듯이 털어놓습니다. 아까 제가 말씀드린 약간 음, 선해야만 하는 세계에서 내 안에 있는 악을 어떻게 볼 것인가, 뭐 그런 갈등을 얘기를 하고, 그리고 성경의 해석에 대한 것도, 뭐랄까, 신에 대한 해석도 그 당시 문화에서는 거의 터부시되던 그런 말까지 되게 털어놓게 되는데요. 결국 아브렉서스라는 신의 이름까지 올립니다. 그리고 그건 연주자에게 음, 되게 깊은 감명이랄까요? 뭐 그거를 받은 것 같아요. 되게 깜짝 놀라죠. 너 이거 어디서 들었냐고, 어디서 들었냐고. 하여간 그런 계기로 둘은 좀 더 친해지기 시작합니다. 그래서 하루는 이제 싱클레어가 초대를 받아서 이 연주자의 집으로 가는데요. 이 연주자는 부모님과 함께 살고 있어요. 그리고 이 연주자는 사실 본인이 스스로 돌아오지 않은 탕자다. 나는 탕자다. 나는 아빠에게 세상이 나에게 실망한 그런 사람이다라고 본인의 이야기를 좀 합니다. 알고 보니까 이 연주자는 원래 신학을 공부했는데, 이제 신학을 공부하다가 본인의 해석과 철학에 쌓여서 그렇게 본인의 신념에 따라서 스스로의 결정을 내린 듯합니다. 그리고 그 결정 때문에 아버지와 불화가 있을 것으로 예상이 되고요. 어쨌건 이 둘은 그 집에서 불을 바라보며, 아마 벽난로겠죠? 불을 바라보며 그냥 별말 없이 철학을 하기로 합니다. 근데 사실 그냥 불멍이죠. 그래서 가서 남자 둘이서 불 보고 누워서 그냥 별말 없이 있다가 싱클레어는 돌아갑니다. 하지만 이 불을 보는 사이에 본인의 내면에서 싱클레어는 본인의 내면에서 어떤 그러니까 스스로에 대한 그 이해가 조금 더 넓어지는 그런 장면이었던 것 같습니다. 그리고 이제 꿈에 대한 얘기도 많이 하는데요. 이 연주자의 이름은 피스토리어스인데 이 연주자는 꿈을 해석할 수 있다고 합니다. 그래서 종종 이제 싱클레어가 본인의 꿈을 어 피스토리어스 이 연주자한테 알려주는데요. 이 연주자는 그 꿈에 대한 해석을 해 줍니다. 네. 5 장 4 장도 그랬고요. 가면 갈수록 싱클레어의 내면 상황, 내면에 대한 묘사를 굉장히 어 뭐랄까요. 컴플렉스하게 어 담아내는 것 같습니다. 이게 되게 뭐랄까요. 아름다운 그림을 볼 때, 명작의 그림을 볼 때 되게 고려해야 될 게 많잖아요. 뭔가가 뭐 저도 사실 미술을 잘 굉장히 모르지만 뭐 미술 작품을 볼 때 막 이런저런 모습이 밸런스가 잘 맞고 뭐 이것과 저것과 뭐 하모니가 있고 뭐 그렇잖아요. 근데 그런 것처럼 마치 차를 마실 때 이 차에서 되게 은은한 여러 가지 향기가 섞여서 함께 들어오듯이 이 작품의 지금까지 모습을 보면 어 여러 주제가 서로 섞이면서 그러나 따로 놀지 않으면서 그게 어떤 내면의 갈등, 굉장히 심오한 그런 세계를 묘사해 주는 것 같아서 굉장히 생각을 많이 하게 하는 그런 작품인 것 같습니다. 일단 여기까지는요. 네, 만다링 님. 저 진짜로 안 졸았습니다, 교수님. 네. 믿을게요. 졸아도 돼요. 졸으라고 하는 건데요, 사실. 생각님, 해피 발렌타인데이입니다. 여러분, 오늘이 발렌타인가요? 발렌타인이에요? 오늘이 발렌타인? 잠깐만요. 오, 맙소사. 발렌타인 맞아. 오, 네, 해피 발렌타인입니다. 저는 근데, 음, 아, 일단 저는, 시간이 좀 있고요. 저에게는 아직 내일이 발렌타인이니까요. 와이프한테 뭘 해줘야 될까? 갑자기 고민이 되네요. 어제 코스트코 갔는데 꽃다발을 살까 했거든요. 발렌타인이 언젠지는 잘 몰랐는데 그냥 코스트코 가면은 종종 그냥 꽃 사가지고 가져오는데 어제 날씨가 추워가지고 그걸 가져오면은 그냥 꽃 얼어버릴까 봐 안 샀는데 아 근데 어차피 그렇게 크게 신경은 안 쓰는데 괜히 괜히 찔리네요. 네. 발렌타인이라고 알려주셔서 감사합니다. 네. 만다링님 맞습니다. 니체의 철학도 영향을 많이 받은 작가입니다. 네, 그런 것 같아요. 읽으면서 안 떠오를 수가 없더라고요. 그리고 사실 책에 니체의 이름이 딱 명시되긴 하죠. 음, 니체의 작품도 언제 읽어드리고 싶다 생각이 드네요. 근데 니체라는 게 사실 쉽게 읽을 순 있는 건 아니지만 네, 그래도 지금까지 읽은 내용으로 바라볼 때 니체가 말하는 그 우범한 어, 뭐라고 하죠? 그 슈퍼맨이라고도 이게 해석이 될 수도 있는데 인간을 뛰어넘은 초인간 그런 설명에 되게 가까워지는 것 같습니다. 달걀을 깨고 본인의 세상을 깨고 아 반드시 사회가 나한테 알려주는 좋음과 나쁨, 다시 말해서 good and evil, 니체의 작품 유명한 작품 중 하나죠. Beyond Good and Evil. 본인의 정체성, 본인의 옳고 그름을 찾아가는 초인격체, 그런 내용을 읽고 있다는 인상을 깊게 받았네요. 네, 생각님, 네, 2월 14일. 다니엘님, 2월 14일이니까요. 다 아내분이 하고 말을 그만하셨어요. 만다링님, 와, 신선한 비유네요. 미술작품. 정말 문장마다 공백이 많은 작품이라고 생각했어요. 삶을 살고 공부하고 생각해야 비로소 완성되는 책, 유유. 네, 맞아요. 맞는 것 같아요. 그래서 역시 고전이 아닌가 싶습니다. 정말 곱씹어 볼 만한 내용이 참 많은 것 같네요. 네, 그리고 만다링님, 핑계입니다. 크크크크. 아이, 뭘. 사는 게 그런 거죠, 뭘. 그래도 뭔가가 해야 될 텐데. 뭘 할까요? 그래도 제가 집에서 잘 해요. 발렌타인이 아니더라도. 그래도 카드 정도는 써야겠다. 네. 근데 어차피 내일 와이프도 집에 없는데. 어디 가가지고. 어쨌건, 네. 개인 사정은 제가 알아서 노력을 해보도록 하고요. 여기까지가 제가 이해한 책의 내용입니다. 음, 네. 이 책에 대해서는 정말 이야기할 게 되게 많은 것 같아요. 그리고 시대의 배경도 배경이다 보니까 1900년대 초반에 독일의 기독교 중심 문화에선 아마 특히 뭐랄까요? 약간 위선적인 선함을 무조건적인 선함을 추구하는 그런 모습이 적잖아 있었을 거라고 예상을 하는데 그거는 제 그냥 이렇게 알고 말하는 게 아니라 그냥 '그럴 수도 있겠다.' 생각하는 거고요. 충분히 제가 틀릴 수 있는데 어쨌건 그러한 배경에서 나온 어 '작품일 수도 있겠다.'라는 생각도 들고요. 물론 니체의 철학에 영향을 받았다고 만다링님이 설명해 주셨고요. 그리고 또 사실 프로이트랑 칼 융의 그 무의식에 대한 그런 영향도 많이 받은 것 같다라는 생각이 들었습니다, 읽으면서. 특히 칼 융이 말하는 이제 collective subconscious라는 어 공동체가 가진 공동체의 무의식 그런 것 사람의 영혼의 깊은 내면에는 그 개인의 것이 아닌 모든 공동체, 모든 역사에 속하는 어 본인의 스스로의 것이 아닌 누구에게 왔는지 모르지만 그런 깊은 내면이 존재한다. 뭐 이런 내용도 그 칼 융의 그런 주장과 되게 일맥상통하는 것 같다는 생각도 들고요. 네, 칼 융의 글도 언제 꼭 읽어드리고 싶은 마음이네요. 네, 만다링님, 생각님, 그럼 솔로 발렌타인이겠네요, 유유. 그렇죠. 네, 그러네요. 아이, 결혼하니까 뭐 별로 감흥이 없어요. 뭐, 저 솔직히 발렌타인인 거 몰라가지고, 그냥, 음, 전 그냥 금요일인 줄 알았어요. 뭐 해주지. 음, 저도 그냥 놀러 갈까 싶었는데. 어쨌건, 네. 솔로 발렌타인이지만, 저는 여러분들과 함께 할 겁니다. 네, 내일 아침. 아니죠. 뭐 내일 새벽, 내일 밤 12시? 저한테는 이제 내일 아침이죠. 네, 소울님, 으악, 너무 늦어버렸네요. 유유유. 괜찮습니다. 이렇게 함께 해주셔서 감사하고요. 늦은 시간인데, 네, 함께 해주셔서 정말 늘 감사한 마음입니다. 네, 언제 오셔도 환영이고요. 만다링님, 혜세가 칼 융한테 주말마다 상담 비슷하게 받았다고 하네요. 오, 역시 개인적으로 신기했어요. 그렇구나. 저도 칼 융이라는 그 심리학자라고 부르는 게 맞겠죠. 하여간 프로이트의 유명한 제자 중 하나이고 인제 그 후에는 프로이트랑 길을 좀 달리했지만 칼 융의 사상, 그분의 글, 이런 게 개인적으로 너무 좋거든요. 인제 여러 생각을 많이 하게 하기도 하고 그 깊이가 정말 믿을 수 없을 만큼 깊다고 생각을 합니다, 개인적으로. 근데 그렇게 똑똑하신 칼 융이 어 니체의 짧은 글에 대한, 제가 기억할 때는 The Speak Zarathustra, 그 자라투스트라는 이렇게 말했다인가? 하여간 그 책에 대한 해석을, 굉장히 긴 해석을 어 본인의 책을 이렇게 냈다고 들었거든요. 제가 알기로는 뭐 1000페이지가 넘는다고 했나, 몇천 페이지가 된다고 했나. 네. 칼 융의 인제 내면에, 인간의 내면에 잠재된 무의식의 세계, 그걸 풀어 헤치는 능력은 정말 굉장히 어 놀라울 정도입니다. 놀랍다는 말로 저는 이렇게 표현이 안 되는 게, 뭔가가 자연의 아름다움을 보면은 막 감격하는 그런 거 있잖아요. 좀 그런 것 같아요. 근데 제가 이렇게 말하는 게 좀 부끄럽긴 한데, 왜냐면 제가 뭐 마치 칼 융의 그거를 잘 이해하는 것처럼, 많이 읽은 것처럼 얘기를 하는데 전혀 그렇지 않거든요. 그냥 강의 같은 거에서 들을 때 그렇게 느꼈을 뿐인데, 꼭 이 채널에서 뭐 1000페이지가 넘는 그거를 이렇게 읽어 드리진 못하겠지만, 언젠가는 일부라도 좀 같이 읽어 드리고 한번 거기에 대해서 소통과 얘기를 한번 해 보고, 그렇게 하고 싶다 생각이 드네요. 네, 생각님, 소통해 주셔서 너무 좋아요. 아유, 감사합니다. 저도 여러분들이랑 얘기하는 게 참 재밌네요. 아, 이따가 코스트코 또 가 가지고 그냥 어제 안 산 꽃을 살까 싶네요. 네, 어쨌건 네, 여기까지가 5 장의 내용이고요. 내용이 제가 이해한 것만, 그리고 제가 기억하는 것만 짧게 요약해 드린 거기 때문에 그렇게 고퀄리티는 아니지만, 제가 그냥 지금까지 제가 이해하고 있는 그 내용입니다. 네. 그리고 물 좀 마시고 제 6 장 챕터 6를 다시 한번, 아니 다시 한번이 아니라, 예, 낭독을 해 보도록 하겠습니다. Chapter 6. Jacob wrestles with God. I cannot relate in brief all that I learned from the singular musician Pistorius about Abraxas. The most important result of his teaching was that I made a further step forward on the road of self-realization. I was then about 18 years old. I was a young man, rather out of the ordinary, precocious in 100 things, in 100 other things backward and helpless. When, from time to time, I used to compare myself with others, I was often proud and conceited, but just as frequently I felt depressed and humiliated. I had often looked upon myself as a genius, often as half mad. I could not share the pleasures and life of the fellows of my age, and often I heaped reproaches on myself, and was consumed with cares, thinking I was hopelessly cut off from them, and that life was close to me. Pistorius, himself full-grown and eccentric, taught me to preserve my courage and my self-esteem. In constantly finding some value in my words, in my dreams, in the play of my imagination, and in my ideas, in taking them seriously and discussing them, he set me an example. "You have told me," he said, "that you like music because it is not moral. Well, all right, but you should be no moralist yourself. You should not compare yourself with others. If nature had created you to be a bat, you ought not to want to make yourself into an ostrich. You often consider yourself as singular. You reproach yourself with going ways different from most people. You must get out of that habit. Look in the fire, look at the clouds, and as soon as you have presentiments, and the voices of your soul begin to speak, yield to them, and don't first ask what the opinion of your master or your father would be, or whether they would be pleasing to some god or other. One spoils oneself that way. In doing that, one treads the common road, becomes a fossil. Sinclair, my dear fellow, the name of our God is Abraxas. He is God and he is Satan. He has the light and dark worlds in him. Abraxas has no objection to urge against any of your ideas or against any of your dreams. Never forget that. But he deserts you if you ever become blameless and normal. He deserts you and seeks out another pot in order to cook his ideas therein. Of all my dreams, that dark love dream recurred most frequently. Often I've dreamed of it. Often I stepped under the crest with a bird on it onto our house and wished to draw my mother to me, but instead of her I found I was embracing the tall, manly, half-motherly woman of whom I was afraid, and yet to whom I was drawn by a most ardent desire. And I could never relate this dream to my friend. I kept it back, although I had opened my heart to him on everything else. It was my secret, my retreat, my refuge. When I was depressed, I used to beg Pistorius to play me the Passacaglia of old Buxtehude. I sat in the dark church in the evening, engrossed in the singularly intimate music, which seemed to be hearkening to itself, as if entirely self-absorbed. Each time it did me good and made me more ready to follow the promptings of my inward self. Sometimes we stayed a while in the church after the strains of the organ had died away. We sat and watched the feeble light shine through the high lancet window. The light seemed to lose itself in the body of the church. "It sounds funny," said Pistorius, "that I once did theology and almost became a parson. But it was only an error in form that I committed. To be a priest, that is my vocation and my aim. Only I was too easily satisfied and gave myself to the service of Jehovah before ever I knew Abraxas. Ah, every religion is beautiful. Religion is soul. It is all one whether you take communion as a Christian or whether you make a pilgrimage to Mecca." "Then really you might have been a clergyman," I suggested. "No, Sinclair, no. I should have had to have lied in that case. Our religion is so practiced as if it were none. It is carried on as if it were a work of the understanding. A Catholic I could well be if need were, but a Protestant clergyman, no. There are two kinds of genuine believers, I know such, who hold gladly to the literal interpretation. I cannot say to them that for me Christ was not a mere person, but a hero, a myth, a wonderful shadow picture, in which mankind sees itself painted on the wall of eternity. And what should I find to say on the other sort, those who go to church to hear wise words, to fulfill a duty, in order to leave nothing undone, etc.? Convert them, you think, perhaps? But that is not at all my idea. The priest does not wish to convert. He only wants to live among the believers, among those of his own kind, so that through him they may find expression for that feeling out of which we make our gods." He broke off. Then he continued, "Our new faith, for which we have now chosen the name of Abraxas, is beautiful, my friend. It is the very best we have, but it is still a nestling. Its wings have not yet grown. Alas, a lonely religion that is not yet the true one. It must become an affair of many. It must have cult and orgy, feasts and mysteries. He was sunk in reflection. Can one not celebrate mysteries alone, or in a very small circle? I asked hesitatingly. Yes, one can, he nodded. I have been celebrating them for a long time past. I have celebrated cults for which I should have been imprisoned for years in a convict station, if they had been found out. But I know it is not the right thing. He suddenly clapped me on the shoulder, making me jump. Young friend, he said impressively, you also have mysteries. I know that you must have dreams of which you make no mention to me. I don't wish to know them, but I tell you, live them, these dreams, play your destined part, build altars to them. It is not yet the perfect religion, but it is a way. Whether you and I and a few other people will one day renew the world remains to be seen, but we must renew it daily within us. Otherwise, we are of no account. Think over it. You are 18, Sinclair. You don't go with loose women. You must have love dreams, desires. Perhaps they are such that you are frightened by them. They are the best you have, believe me. I have lost a great deal by doing violence to these love dreams when I was your age. One should not do that. When one knows of Abraxas, one should do that no more. We should fear nothing. We should hold nothing forbidden which the soul in us desires. Frightened, I objected. But you can't do everything which comes into your mind. You can't murder a man because you can't tolerate him. He pressed closer to me. There are cases where you can. Only, generally, it's a mistake. I don't mean that you can simply do everything which comes into your mind, no. But you shouldn't do injury to those ideas in which there is sense. You shouldn't banish them from your mind or moralize about them. Instead of getting oneself crucified or crucifying others, one can solemnly drink wine out of a cup, thinking the while on the mystery of sacrifice. One can, without such actions, treat one's impulses and one's so-called temptations with esteem and love. Then you discover their meaning, and they all have meaning. Next time the idea takes you to do something really mad and sinful, Sinclair, if you would like to murder someone or to do something dreadfully obscene, then think a moment that it is Abraxas who is indulging in a play of fancy. The man you would like to kill is never really Mr. So-and-so. That is really only a disguise. When we hate a man, we hate in him something which resides in us ourselves. What is not in us does not move us. Never had Pistorius said anything to me which went home so deeply as this. I could not reply. But what moved me most singularly and most powerfully was that Pistorius in this conversation had struck the same note as Demian, whose words I had carried in my mind for years and years past. They knew nothing of one another, and both said to me the same thing. The things we see, said Pistorius softly, are the same things which are in us. There is no reality except that which we have in ourselves. For that reason, most people live so unreally, because they hold the impressions of the outside world for real, and their own world in themselves never enters into their consideration. You can be happy like that. But if once you know of the other, then you no longer have the choice to go the way most people go. Sinclair, the road for most people is easy. Ours is hard. Let us go. A few days later, after I had on 2 occasions waited for him in vain, I met him late one evening in the street. He came stumbling round a corner, blown along by the cold night wind. He was very drunk. I did not like to call him. He passed by without noticing me, staring in front of him with strange glowing eyes, as though he were moving in obedience to a dark call from the unknown. I followed him down one street. He drifted along as if drawn by an invisible wire, with the swaying gait of a fanatic or like a ghost. Sadly, I went home to the unsolved problems of my dreams. Thus he renews the world in himself, I thought, and felt instantly that my thought was base and moral. What did I know of his dreams? Perhaps in his intoxication, he was going a surer way than in my anxiety. In the intervals between lessons, it struck me once or twice that a boy who had never before attracted my notice was hovering about in my proximity. He was a little, weak-looking, slim youngster with reddish-blonde thin hair, who had something peculiar in his look and behavior. One evening as I came home, he was on the watch for me in the street. He let me pass by, then walked behind me, and remained standing in front of the door of the house. "Can I do anything for you?" I asked. "I only want to speak to you," he said timidly. "Be good enough to come a few steps with me." I followed him, observing that he was deeply excited and full of expectation. His hands trembled. "Are you a spiritualist?" he asked quite suddenly. "No, no," I said, laughing. "Not a bit. How did you get hold of that idea?" "But you are a theosophist?" "No again." "No, please don't be so reserved. I feel with absolute certitude there is something singular about you. It is in your eyes. I thought it certain you communed with spirits. I am not asking out of curiosity, Sinclair. No, I am myself a seeker, and I am so lonely." "Tell me then," I encouraged him. "I know absolutely nothing of ghosts. I live in my dreams. That is what you have felt about me. Other people live in dreams as well, but not in their own. That is the difference." "Yes, perhaps so," he whispered. "Only it depends on the sort of dreams you live in. Have you ever heard of white magic?" I had to admit my ignorance. "It's when you learn to get the mastery over yourself. You can be immortal and have magical powers as well. Have you never practiced such experiments?" On my evincing curiosity with regard to those practices, he was mysteriously silent, but when I turned to go, he burst out in explanation. "For example, when I go to sleep or when I wish to concentrate my thoughts, I do such exercises. I think of something or other, a word, for instance, or a name or a geometrical figure. Then I think it into myself as strongly as I can. I try to get it into my head until I feel it is there. Then I think it in my neck and so on, until I am quite full of it. Then my thoughts are concentrated and nothing more can disturb my repose." I understood to a certain degree what he meant, yet I felt he had something else in his mind. He was oddly excited and hasty. I tried to make questions easy for him, and he soon gave me an indication of what immediately concerned him. "You are also continent?" he asked me anxiously. "What do you mean by that? Do you mean it from the sex point of view?" Yes, I have been continent for 2 years, since I knew of what I have told you. Before that I practiced a vice, you know what. You have never been with a woman, then?" "No," I said, "I haven't found the right one." "But if you should find her, the one you consider the right one, then would you sleep with her?" "Yes, naturally, if she had nothing against it," I said with some scorn. "Oh, then you are on a false track. One can only perfect one's inner forces if one remains entirely continent. I have done it for 2 whole years, 2 years and a little more than a month. It's so hard. Often I can scarcely hold out any longer." "Listen, Naur, I don't believe that continency is so terribly important." "I know," he parried. "They all say that, but I did not expect to hear it from you. Whoever will go the higher spiritual way must remain pure, unconditionally." "Well then, do so. But I don't understand why one man should be purer than another because he represses his sex instincts. Or can you switch off all sexual matters from your thoughts and dreams?" He looked despairingly at me. "No, that's it. That's just it. God, And yet it must be. At night I have dreams which I couldn't relate even to myself. Terrible dreams, terrible. I recollected what Pistorius had said to me, but however much I felt his words to be right, I could not pass them on. I could not give advice which did not result from my own experience, advice the observance of which I did not yet feel myself equal to. I was silent and felt humiliated that someone should come to me for counsel when I had none to give. I have tried everything, wailed Naur beside me. I have done all that a man can do, with cold water, with snow, with gymnastic exercises and running, but all that doesn't help a bit. Each night I wake up out of dreams on which I dare not think. And most dreadfully of all, I am by degrees losing everything that I had gained spiritually. It is almost impossible for me any longer to concentrate my thoughts or to lull myself to sleep. Often I lie awake the whole night through. I shall not be able to bear that much longer. Finally, when I can carry on the struggle no longer, when I give in and make myself impure again, then I shall be worse than all the others who have never struggled against it. You understand that, don't you? I nodded, but could say nothing to the point. He began to bore me, and I was horrified at myself, because his obvious need and despair made me no deep impression on me. My only sentiment was, I can't help you. Then you know nothing that would help me? He asked at last, exhausted and sad. Nothing at all? There must be some way. How do you manage? I cannot tell you anything now. People can't help one another in this case. No one has helped me either. You must think of something yourself, and you must obey the prompting which really comes from your own nature. There is nothing else. If you cannot find yourself, you won't find any spirits either. Disappointed and suddenly become numb, the little fellow looked at me. Then his look suddenly glowed with hate. He made a grimace at me and cried with rage. Ah, you're a nice sort of saint. You have your vice as well, I know. You pretend to wisdom, and secretly you'd stick in the same filth as I and all of us. You're swine like myself. We are all swine. I went away and left him standing there. He made 2-3 steps in my direction. Then he stopped, turned round, and ran away. I felt sick from a feeling of pity and horror. I could not get rid of the feeling until I got home to my little room, and placing my few pictures before me, I surrendered myself up with passionate fervor to my dreams. My dreams came back at once, the dream of front door and crest, of mother and the strange woman, and I saw the features of the woman so very clearly that I began to draw her picture the same evening. In a few days, this drawing was finished, painted in as if unconsciously in dreamy quarter-of-an-hour periods. In the evening, I hung it on the wall, put the reading lamp in front of it, and stood before it as soon as the spirit with whom I had to fight until victory should be decided one way or the other. It was a face similar to the former, resembling my friend Demian, in certain traits even resembling myself. One eye stood perceptibly higher than the other. The look passed over me, sunk in a staring gaze, full of destiny. I stood before it. Such was my inward exertion that I became cold to the marrow. I questioned the picture. I abused it. I caressed it. I prayed to it. I called it mother. I called it beloved. Called it strumpet and whore. Called it Abraxas. Meanwhile, words of Pistorius crossed my mind. Or of Demian. I could not recollect on what occasion they had been spoken, but I thought I heard them again. They were the words of Jacob wrestling with the angel of God. I will not let thee go except thou bless me. The painted face in the lamplight changed at each appeal. It was bright and shining, was black and gloomy. It closed pale lids over dead eyes, opened them again and flashed a burning look. It was woman, man, girl. It was a little child, an animal, vanished to a speck, was again tall and clear. At last, in response to a strong inward prompting, I closed my eyes and saw the picture inwardly in me, stronger and more powerful. I wished to kneel down before it, but it was so much within me that I could separate it from myself no more. It seemed as if it had entirely identified itself with me. Then I heard a loud, confused roar, as of a spring storm. I trembled in an indescribably new feeling of fear and excitement. Stars darted before me and died out, recollections even of the first forgotten years of my childhood, of a time further back still, of a pre-existence and the early stages of experience pressed through me. But the recollections which seemed to piece together my life's whole history, even to its most secret details, did not cease with yesterday and today. They went further, mirrored the future, tearing me away from today, changing me into new forms of life, of which the pictures were very bright and blinding. But of none of them could I call up a just image later. In the night, I woke up out of a deep sleep. I was dressed and lying transversely across the bed. I struck a light, feeling that I must try to remember something important that had happened. I knew nothing of the hours just past. I turned on the light, and recollection came back gradually. I looked for the picture. It was not hanging on the wall, neither was it lying on the table. I thought confusedly that I must have burned it, or was it a dream that I had burned it in my hands and had eaten the ashes? A great inquietude convulsed me and drove me forth. I put on my hat, went out of the house and down the street, as if under coercion. I walked and walked through streets and squares, as if blown along by a storm. I listened in front of the gloomy church of my friend, searched in obedience to a blind impulse, without knowing what I was looking for. I went through a suburb, where a brothel stood. Here and there a light was still shining. Further on stood new buildings and brick heaps, covered in part and with gray snow. I went on through this wilderness, driven forward by a strange impulse, like a man walking in a dream. The thought of the new building in my native town crossed my mind, that building to which my tormentor Cromer had drawn me to settle accounts with him. In the gray night, a similar building stood there in front of me, its black doorway yawning wide. I was drawn towards it, but wanted to shun it and stumbled it over sand and rubbish. The impulse was stronger than I had to go in. I staggered over planks and broken bricks into the deserted room. There was a moldy smell of damp, cold stones. A heap of sand lay there, a gray, bright speck. Otherwise, all else was dark. Suddenly, a terrified voice called to me, "In God's name, Sinclair, where have you come from?" And a human figure rose out of the darkness close to me, a little thin shape like a ghost. I recognized, while yet my hair was standing on end, my school companion, Nauer. "How did you get here?" he asked, as if mad with excitement. "How have you been able to find me?" I did not understand. "I wasn't looking for you," I said, dazed. I spoke with difficulty. The words came from me painfully, as if from dead, heavy, frozen lips. "You weren't looking for me?" "No, I was drawn here. Did you call me?" "You must have called. But what are you doing here? It's still night." He put his thin arms convulsively around me. "Yes, night. But it must soon be morning. Oh, Sinclair, to think that you didn't forget me. Can you ever forgive me?" "What then?" "Ah, I was so hateful." Then I recollected our conversation. Had that taken place 4 or 5 days ago? It seemed to me like a lifetime, but suddenly I knew all. Not only what had occurred between us, but also why I had come and what Nauer said to me what Nauer wanted to do there. You wanted then to take your life, Nour? He shuddered through cold and fear. Yes, I wanted to. I don't know whether I could have. I wished to wait until the morning came. I drew him into the open. The first oblique rays of day glimmered indescribably cold through the gray atmosphere. I led the boy on my arm a little way. I heard my own voice saying, Now go home and don't say anything to anybody. You were on a false track, and we are not swine as you think. We are men, we make gods, and we wrestle with them, and they bless us. Silently we went on and separated. When I came home, it was day. The best that mystery and saint had yet to give me was the hours with Pistorius at the organ or by the chimney fire. We read a Greek text about Abraxas together. He read to me the portions of a translation of the Veda and taught me to say the sacred Om. However, it was not this learned instruction which was of service to my inner self, but rather the contrary. What did me good was the self-progression I made, the increasing confidence in my own dreams, thoughts, presentiments, and the consciousness of the power that I carried in me. I had an excellent understanding with Pistorius in every way. I needed only to think intently of him, and I could be sure that he, or a greeting from him, would come to me. I could ask him, just as I could Demian, something or other, without being there in person. I needed only to imagine his presence and to put my questions to him as intensive thoughts. Then all the soul force I had put into the question came back to me as answer. Only, it was not the person of Pistorius which I called up in my imagination, nor that of Max Demian, but it was the picture I had painted and of which I had dreamed. It was the half-man, half-woman dream picture of my demon to which I called. It lived now not only in my dreams, it was no longer painted on paper, but it was in me as a desire picture and an enhancement of my spiritual self. The relation into which the unsuccessful suicide now entered with me was peculiar and sometimes amusing. Since the night I had been sent to him, he dogged my steps like a faithful servant or hound, sought to attach himself to me and followed me blindly. He came to me with curious questions and wishes. He wanted to see spirits, to learn the Kabbalah, and he did not believe me when I assured him I understood nothing of all these things. He credited me with being able to do anything, but it was singular that he often came to me with his queer and silly questions, just at the moment when I myself had a mental knot to be disentangled. His moody ideas and concerns often gave me the cue, the impulse which helped me in the solution of my own problems. He was often tiresome, and I imperiously drove him away. I felt, however, that he had been sent to me, and what I gave to him I received twofold in return. He also was a guide, or rather a way. The mad books and publications he brought me, and in which he sought the key to happiness, taught me more than I realized at the time. This Nour vanished later from my path, neither did I miss him. No arrangement, no understanding was necessary with him, but it was with Pistorius. Towards the close of my school career in Saint, I lived through another peculiar experience with my friend. Even innocuous, innocent people are not altogether spared the shock of a conflict. Even they come once in their lives in conflict with the beautiful virtues of piety and gratitude. Each must make the step which parts him from his father, from his teachers. Each must once feel something of the bitterness of loneliness, though most people cannot support it for long and soon creep back to their homes again. It was not a great struggle for me to part from my parents and their world, the bright world of my beautiful childhood. But slowly and almost imperceptibly, I had got further from them and become more of a stranger to them. I regretted it. It often caused me bitter hours during my visits home, but it was not deep. I could bear it. But when we have offered love and reverence in our own accord, and not out of habit, when we have been disciples and friends with our innermost feelings, then it is a bitter and terrible moment when the realization is suddenly brought home to us that the guiding current of our life is bearing us away from those we love. Then, every thought of ours which rejects our friend and teacher enters our own heart like a poison sting. Every blow of self-defense strikes back into our own face. Then, he who felt that the dictates of his own conscience were an authentic guide reproaches himself with the terms faithlessness and ingratitude. When the terrified heart flees anxiously back to the valleys of childhood virtues and cannot believe that the rupture must take place, that another bond must be severed. In the course of time, a feeling had slowly developed in me which refused to recognize my friend Pistorius unconditionally as my guide. What I experienced in the most important moments of my youth was my friendship with him, his counsel, his consolation, his proximity. God had spoken to me through him. Through him, my dreams returned to me. From his mouth came their explanation. From him, I learned their significance. He had given me the courage to realize myself. And now, alas, I felt a growing opposition against him. In his conversation, he evinced too clearly a desire to instruct me. I felt it was only one side of my nature that he thoroughly understood. There was no quarrel, no scene between us, no rupture. I said to him only a single, really harmless word, but nevertheless, it was the moment when an illusion between us fell in colored pieces. The presentiment had for some time already oppressed me, but one Sunday in a scholarly old room, this presentiment changed to a definite feeling. We were lying on the floor before the fire. He was speaking of mysteries and religious forms which he was studying, and on which he was meditating. He occupied himself with trying to picture their possible future. To me, all this seemed curious and interesting, but scarcely of vital importance. It smacked of erudition. It was like a fatiguing search among the ruins of former worlds, and all at once I felt an aversion from the whole business, from this cult of mythology, from this sort of piecing together, this mosaic work of religious forms which had been handed down to posterity. Pistorius, I said suddenly, in a malicious outburst which surprised and frightened even myself. Relate a dream, a real dream, one that you have had in the night. What you have just been talking about is so cursely antiquarian. He had never heard me speak thus. With shame and terror, I realized the very same moment that the arrow I had shot at him, and which had entered his heart, was taken from his own quiver. I realized that I had heard him reproach himself in an ironical tone in this very account, and that now I had maliciously turned one of his own reproaches against him, like a resharpened arrow. He felt it instantly and was silent. I looked at him with terror in my heart and saw that he had become very pale. After a long, heavy pause, he put some wood on the fire and said quietly, "You are quite right, Sinclair. You're a wise fellow. I will spare you all this antiquarian business." He spoke very quietly, but his tone told me how deeply he had been wounded, what I had done. I was on the point of tears. I wanted to beg his pardon with all my heart, to assure him of my affection and gratitude. Moving words came into my mind, but I could not utter them. He was silent as well, and so we lay there while the flames leaped up and then sank, and with each flame that fell something beautiful and fervid that ceased to glow and had vanished, never again to come back. "I fear you have misunderstood me," I said at last, much crushed, and with a dry, hoarse voice. The silly, senseless words came as if mechanically from my lips, as if I had been reading them from a news sheet. "I understood you perfectly," said Pistorius softly. "You are quite right." We waited. Then he continued slowly. "So far as one man can be right in his judgment of another." No, a voice inside me said, "I am wrong." But I could not say anything. I knew that I had aimed my single little word at his one essential weakness. I had touched a point of which he himself was distrustful. His idea was antiquarian. He was a seeker, but a retrogressive. He was a romantic. And suddenly I realized that it was just what he had been to me and had given me that he could not be and give to himself. He had guided me to a point on the road beyond which he, the guide, could not go. God knows how I could have uttered such a word. I had not meant it badly. I had had no idea it would lead to a catastrophe. I had uttered something, the import of which I did not myself realize at the moment of utterance. I had surrendered myself to a somewhat witty, somewhat malicious inspiration, and fate used it as her instrument. I had been guilty of a little thoughtlessness, crudeness, and he had accepted it as a judgment. Oh, how much I wished then that he would have got angry, have defended himself, have shouted at me. But he did nothing. I had all that to do within myself. He would have smiled had he been able. The fact that he could not showed me more than anything else how hard I had hit him. And because Pistorius took the blow from me, his presumptuous and ungrateful pupil, so quietly, because he silently agreed with me, because he recognized my word as a judgment of fate, he caused me to hate myself. He made my thoughtlessness seem 1,000 times greater than it was. As I struck, I had thought to hit a strong man, capable of defending himself. Now he was a meek, suffering creature, defenseless, who surrendered in silence. We remained a long time lying before the dying fire, in which each glowing figure, each crumbling ash heap called to my memory happy, beautiful, rich hours, making my guilt and my obligation to Pistorius greater and greater. Finally, I could bear it no longer. I got up and went. A long time I stood before his door. A long time I listened on the dark staircase. A long time I stood outside in front of the house, waiting to see whether perhaps he would come out to me. Then I went on, walking for hours and hours through town and suburbs, park and wood until evening fell. At that moment, I felt for the first time the mark of Cain on my forehead. I fell to pondering and rumination. I had every intention, in thinking matters over, to accuse myself and to defend Pistorius, but all ended to the contrary. 1,000 times I was ready to repent of my rash word and to withdraw it, but it had to have been true. Now I succeeded in understanding Pistorius, in building up his whole dream. This dream had been to be a priest, to proclaim a new religion, to invent new forms of exaltation, of love, of worship, to set up new symbols. But this was not within his province. He lingered too long in the past. He knew too much of what had been. He knew too much of Egypt, of India, of Mithras, of Abraxas. His love was attached to ideas with which the world was already familiar, and in his inmost self he probably recognized that the new religion had to be different, that it had to spring from the fresh sources and not be drawn out of collections, and libraries. His office was, perhaps, to help men to find themselves, as he had done with me, but to found a new doctrine, to give new gods to the world, was not his function in life. And at this point, the realization came upon me that everyone has an office, a charge, but to no one it is permitted to choose his office for himself and to discharge it as he likes. It was wrong to want new gods. It was entirely wrong to wish to give the world anything. A man has absolutely no other duty than this, to seek himself, to grope his own way forward, no matter whither it leads. That thought impressed itself deeply on me. That was the fruit of this new event for me. Often had I pictured the future, I had dreamed of filling roles which might be destined for me, as poet perhaps, or as prophet, as painter, or some such role. All that was of no account. I was not here to write, to preach, to paint. Neither I nor anyone else was here for that purpose. All that was secondary. The true vocation for everyone was only to attain to self-realization. He might end as poet or as madman, as prophet or as criminal. That was not his affair. That was of no consequence in the long run. His business was to work out his own destiny, not any destiny, but his own, to live for that, entirely and uninterruptedly. Everything else was merely an attempt to shun his fate, to fly back to the ideals of the masses, to adapt himself to circumstances. It was fear of his own inner being. There rose before me this new picture, terrible and sacred, suggested to me 100,000 times ere this, perhaps often already expressed, but now for the first time I lived. I was a throw from nature's dice box, a projection into the unknown, perhaps into something new, perhaps into the void, and my sole vocation was to let this throw up from primeval depths work itself out in me, to feel its will in me and to make it mine, that solely. I had already known what it was to be very lonely. Now I felt I could be lonelier still, and that I could not escape from it. I made no attempt to reconcile myself with Pistorius. We remained friends, but our relation towards one another had changed. Only one single time did we mention it, or rather, it was only he who spoke of the matter. He said, "I want to be a priest, you know that. I would best of all like to be the priest of the religion of which we have so many presentiments. I can never be that, I know. I have known it already for some time, without fully admitting it. I will do some other priestly service, perhaps at the organ, perhaps in another way. But I must always be surrounded by something which I find beautiful and sacred, organ music and mysteries, symbol and myth. I need that and cannot persuade myself to leave it. That is my weakness. I often realize, Sinclair, that I should not have such desires, that they are a luxury and a weakness. It would be greater, it would be more right, if I placed myself quite simply at the disposition of fate, without pretensions. That is the sole thing I cannot do. Perhaps you will sometime be able to do it. It is hard. It is the only thing really hard there is, my friend. I have often dreamed of it, but I cannot do it. I tremble at the thought of it. I cannot stand so completely naked and alone. I am a poor, weak hound, who needs a little warmth and food, who occasionally likes to feel the proximity of his own kind. He whose only desire it is to work out his own destiny has no kith or kin, but stands alone and has only the cold world space around him. Do you know that is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? There have been martyrs who willingly let themselves be nailed to the cross, but even they were not heroes. They were not free. They also wished for something to which they had been accustomed, which they had loved, with which they had felt at home. They had examples or ideals. He who will fulfill his destiny has neither examples nor ideals. He has nothing dear to him, nothing to comfort him. And one really ought to go this way. People like you and I are certainly very lonely, but we still have each other. We have the secret satisfaction of being different, of revolting, of wanting to be unusual. But we must drop that too, if we would go the whole way. We must not wish to be revolutionaries, or examples, or martyrs, to think the thought to its logical end. No, one could not think beyond that, but one could dream of it, could sense it, could anticipate it. A few times I realized something of this in a very quiet hour. Then I looked straight into the open, staring eyes of my fate. They could have been full of wisdom or full of madness. They could be full of love or full of wickedness. It was all one. One was to choose nothing of all that. One was to want nothing. One was only to want oneself, one's destiny. In that way had Pistorius served me, for a time, as guide. In those days I walked about as if I were blind. Storms roared within me. Every step meant danger. I was conscious of nothing but the precipitous darkness in front of me, down to which all the roads I had trodden hitherto seemed to lead. And in my inward self I saw the picture of the guide who resembled Demian, and in whose eyes stood my fate. I wrote on a sheet of paper, "A guide has left me. I stand in complete darkness. I cannot take a step alone. Help me." I wished to send that to Demian, yet I omitted to do this, for each time I wished to do it, it seemed foolish and meaningless. But I knew that little prayer by heart, and often said it to myself. It accompanied me hourly. I began to realize what prayer is. My school career was over. My father had arranged that during the holidays I was to travel, and then I was to go to the university. In which faculty I knew not. I was to be allowed to take philosophy for one semester. I should have been equally content with anything else. 네, 이렇게가 6장의 끝입니다. 네, 갈수록 복잡해지는 내용인 것 같고요. 제가 충분히 요약을 해드리긴 어려울 것 같은데, 아까 말씀드렸던 그 연주자 피스토리어스와 친분을 쌓고, 그리고 그 친분을 통해서 이 싱클레어의 이 아이디어, 이 신념, 생각, 이렇게가 다 함께 소통하면서 이거를 배워나가는 그런 친구였던 것 같습니다. 피스토리어스가. 그래서 어떻게 보면 약간 멘토라고 볼 수 있겠는데요. 그것도 끝이 나게 됩니다. 이 6장의 끝부분에. 별거가 아니라고 볼 수도 있는 그냥 짧은 코멘트인데, 싱클레어가 말을 하죠. 피스토리어스, 너의 꿈 얘기를 나한테 이제 해줘. 네가 얘기하는 이 모든 것은 너무 옛날 거잖아. 옛날 아이디어, 옛날 문명 이런 거에 얘기 말고 네가 꾸는 꿈을 나한테 얘기해줘. 근데 네가 말하는 건 전부 다 옛날 거다라는 이 말이 그 둘의 사이를 약간 그 멘토라는 관계를 흐트러 버리는 것 같습니다. 네. 그래서 그리고 그 나머지는요, 되게 몇 번은 읽어봐야 하고 이제 몇 번 읽으면서 좀 노트에다 적고 그런 다음에 생각을 해봐야, 정리를 해봐야지 제가 여러분들께 요약을 해드릴 수 있을 것 같은데요. 아직 그럴 만큼 생각이 나지도 않지만 굉장히 디테일한 묘사, 심리 묘사가 나왔던 장인 것 같습니다. 그리고 그 내면 무의식의 심리에 대한 묘사는 피스토리어스 그 멘토와의 대화 내용에서도 나타날 뿐더러 나레이터 자신이 본인의 꿈을 이야기하면서 이제 본인 내면에 잠재되어 있는 깊은 그런 심볼리즘이라 할까요? 그거를 우리한테 알려주면서 그걸 통해서 우리는 약간 엿볼 수 있는 것 같습니다. 그리고 6장의 마지막에 이제 학교가 끝이 났고 대학교로 아버지가 나를 보내시겠다고 했다라고 그게 끝이 났는데요. 이게 학교 시스템이 아마 조금 다를 수도 있겠다 싶은 게 사립학교는 처음에 다니던 사립학교 어 라틴어 사립학교가 나이로 따지면은 중학교, 고등학교 뭐 그 중간 사이였나 싶기도 하고 그다음에 간 게 저는 대학교라고 생각을 했었는데 그게 아닌가 뭐 그쯤 되나. 그리고 지금 6장 끝날 때 말하던 게 그 대학원을 말하는 건가. 하여간 정확하게 아직 정리는 안 되지만 네. 되게 음 되게 매력 있는 작품 같습니다. 뭔가 어 비빔밥 같은 작품인데요. 제가 스스로 느끼기에는 되게 그 비빔밥의 재료 하나하나가 되게 잘 어우러져서 뭔가가 왜 그런 책들이 있잖아요. 막 작가들이 본인들이 하고자 하는 말을 너무 오버해 가지고 너무 명료하게 이렇게 나타내는 작품이 있는데 이 책의 매력은 그게 아니라 오히려 이 비빔밥의 막 그 고연의 고유의 이 향 이런 거를 막 되게 깊은 곳에 숨겨 놓고 읽는 사람한테 너 이거 찾을 수 있어?" 뭐 이런 느낌인 것 같아요. 되게 어 글 문장 하나하나를 곱씹게 만들고 '이게 무슨 의미일까? 이 심볼은 뭘까?' 그렇게 생각을 하게 하는 굉장히 씹을수록 단물이 나는 껌인 것 같습니다. 이 흐름을 보아하니 책을 읽으면 읽을수록 나중에 장을 읽을수록 요약이 왠지 더 어려울 것 같은데요. 뭐 요약할 만한 어 그게 능력이 안 된다면은 그냥 요약을 그만두겠습니다. 네. 오히려 요약보다는 질문이 더 맞을 수도 있겠는데요. 네, 황주부 별주가 아니고님 다시 잠들어 보겠습니다. ZZZ. 네. 안녕히 주무시고요. 좋은 꿈 꾸고 계시길 바랍니다. 생각님, 전 다 듣고 잘래요. 네, 감사합니다, 생각님. 늦은 시간인데 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 만다링님, 정리가 안 되신다니 정상이시네요. 그렇군요. 네. 만다링님, 저도 인물 관계도 그리고 메모하면서 읽습니다. 비빔밥, 크크크크, 데미안은 비빔밥이다. 네, 이게 그 비빔밥인데 이게 그 뭐지? 흑백 요리사에서 마지막에 그 성함을 까먹었는데 그 셰프님이 심사하는 셰프님이 막 아, 최 최머시기 셰프님이었나? 하여간 떨어뜨리기 전에 되게 신나해서 나선형으로 막 섞여 있다고 막 그 손 제스처 하잖아요. 막 그런 식으로 막 섞여 있는 그런 느낌인 것 같아요. 이게 너무 이게 막 이게 저거랑 연결이 돼 있고 저건 또 이거랑 연결돼 있고 뭐 재료 하나하나가 막 섞여지면서 그게 되니까 그거를 풀이해 보는 약간 뭐 그런 느낌이 드네요. 근데 저는 개인적으로 읽으면서 이 이야기를 내가 막 음 이 심볼리즘 하나하나를 풀이하겠다 혹은 뭐 해석하겠다 이런 느낌이 아직은 들진 않고요. 그냥 처음 읽어보는 사람 입장에서 약간 이 큰 주제가 나한테 다가오는 그런 느낌 혹은 뭐 인상 그런 거를 생각하게 하는 그런 작품인 것 같습니다. 읽으면서 되게 뭐랄까요? 되게 딴 생각 많이 하게 만드는 작품이라고도 설명할 수 있겠는데요. 이게 지루해서 그런 게 아니라 뭐랄까 책에서 이야기하는 이 주제가 다른 작품에서도 그러니까 죄와 벌 생각도 막 들었거든요. 음 네. 죄와 벌에 되게 밀접한 관련이 있을 것 같다. 그러니까 뭐 역사적으로 진짜 그 둘이 막 뭐가 작가분들이 막 친분이 있었고 이게 아니라 굉장히 비슷한 주제를 갖고 어 그 두 저자의 음 생각이 약간 바라보는 관점이 다르게 그렇게 해석한 그런 작품이라고 볼 수 있겠다 싶고 그래서 죄와 벌, 도스토옙스키의 죄와 벌도 언젠가는 읽어 드리고 싶은데 죄와 벌이 사실 그게 참 책이 길어서 근데 그거는 또 일부만 읽어 드리기는 쪼끔 뭐하기도 한데 뭐 만약에 일부만 읽어 드린다면 첫 부분이 아니라 한 중간이나 마지막 부분 그렇게만 읽어 드려야 할까 싶기도 하고요. 네. 여러모로 참 생각을 자아내는 그런 매력적인 책입니다. 네 만다링 님. 이 흑백 요리사 눈을 가리고 먹는 음식 같은 미지의 책 맛있긴 한데 죄와 벌 빡세네요. 네 이게 참 똑같은 말을 계속 제가 반복하긴 하는데 되게 매력 있는 작품이네요. 그냥 혼자 생각할 때는. 몇 번 더 읽어 볼 것 같아요. 만다링 님께서 왜 이렇게 좋아하시는지 저도 뭔가가 되게 그렇게 다가오는 것 같아요. 이거 죄와 벌 빡세죠. 빡세긴 한데 제가 읽어 본 작품 중에서 거의 원탑 중 하나라고 생각이 네 듭니다. 네 만다링 님 조금 다른 이야기지만 지난달에 펀딩으로 심층 해설이 더해진 데미안이 출판되었더라고요. 지금까지 해설을 연구해 오신 박사님들이 있다네요. 워낙 자전적인 소설이라 해설 궁금하신 분들 추천드려요. 네, 추천 주셔서 감사합니다. 제가 지금은 캐나다에 있지만 만약에 언제 한국에 가게 된다면 그런 뭐 전문가분들 아니면 박사님, 교수님, 뭐 저자분들 아니면 그냥 일반 직장인들 뭐 그냥 여러분들이랑 1대1로 대화를 하면서 이런 작품에 대한 어 이야기도 좀 나누고 싶다는 생각이 네 드는데요. 글쎄요. 뭐 그런 날이 올까요 과연? 네. 심층 해설이 더해진 데미안. 저도 이거를 음 그렇게 된 거를 읽어 드릴 수 있으면 좋겠지만 네 아마 일단 데미안은 제가 읽고 있는 중이고 이 해설만 제가 읽어 드리진 또 못하겠죠. 그러니까 네 궁금하신 분들은 네 한번 찾아보시는 거를 저도 권유를 해 드리겠습니다. 근데 저는 이제 어떤 내용인지 모르니까요. 막 이게 좋은 해설이다 이거는 말 못하지만 궁금하신 분들은 네 어 그런 책이 된다고 하네요. 네. 만다링 님 그러게요. 저도 이렇게 신난 이유가 평소에 책 이야기를 나눌 기회가 많이 없네요. 그렇죠. 저도 솔직히 책을 읽는 것보다 그 책에 대해서 얘기하는 게 전 더 좋은 것 같아요. 개인적으로. 뭔가가 책이 내포하고 있는 그런 철학적 문제라든지 아니면 꼭 그렇게 깊은 대화가 아니더라도 되게 시골콜한 뭐 그런 네 별 영양가 없는 그런 대화도 되게 좋아하는데 살다 보면은 그럴 기회가 참 많진 않죠. 그래서 저도 사실 이렇게 읽어 드리고 뭐 대화하고 진행하고 이러는 게 음 되게 이기적인 거예요. 전 이기적인 마음으로 제가 좋아서 하는 거고, 어쨌건 헤르만 헤세의 데미안을 읽게 돼서 참 좋은 기회가 된 것 같습니다. 이게 결말이 어떻게 끝날지 참 궁금한데요. 과연 이 책은 글쎄 뭐 이런 식으로 카테고라이징을 할 수 있을지는 모르겠는데요. 비극으로 끝날까 아니면 해피엔딩으로 끝날까, 이렇게 지금 모르는 상태에서 음 한번 생각을 해 보자면, 모르겠어요. 모르겠네. 뭐랄까, 달콤 씁쓸한 그런 해피엔딩일 것 같아요. 해피엔딩인 이유는 싱클레어 본인이 자신의 자아를 실현하고 있는 모습으로 뭔가 끝날 것 같은데, 그 실현된 모습이 마냥 어 마냥 이상화된, 이제 마냥 미화된 그런 모습은 또 아닐 것 같다라는 생각을 지금 하게 되네요. 네, 앞으로 계속 읽어가면서 어떻게 이 작품이 끝날지 굉장히 궁금합니다. 네. 이 작품은 진짜 뭔가가 되게 딱 앉아서 한 3-4 시간 대화를 하면서 좀 풀어가고 싶다, 그런 생각이 드네요. 네. 만다링 님. 네, 일단 그게 어떤 의미의 오인 거는 모르겠지만요. 네. 저도 처음으로 읽어가는 과정이기 때문에 이렇게 오는 대로 느껴보겠습니다. 네. 비빔밥이 입 안으로 들어오는 대로 한번 맛을 보도록 하죠. 네. 하루의 마지막 부분인데요. 하루의 마무리를 함께 해 주신 여러분들, 뭐 늘 그렇지만요, 정말 진심을 다해서 감사하다고 말씀을 드리고 싶고요. 만다링 님, 나중에 기회 되시면 아킬레우스의 노래도 부탁드려요. 네. 아킬레우스의 노래 적어 놓을게요. 이것도 고전 작품인가요? 아니면 쪼끔 더 최근 작품인가요? 제가 고전이면은 인제, 그러니까 저작권이 만료가 됐으면은 마음대로 읽어 드릴 수 있는데요. 그렇지 않으면은 이게 읽어 드린다고 제가 확답을 드릴 수가 없어 가지고, 근데 일단 적어 놨으니까 제가 어 만약에 출판사에 연락을 해야 되면은 연락을 한번 해서 해 보도록 하겠습니다. 네. 아이고, 밤 늦었는데 주무셔야죠. 잘 때 다 됐는데 말입니다. 네, 만다링 님, 늦은 시간에 이렇게 저랑 대화를 해 주셔서 참 감사하고요. 이런저런 작품에 대한 얘기, 그리고 작품에 대한 추가적인 어 해설이나 이렇게 제가 모르는 부분을 설명해 주셔서 참 감사합니다. 네. 만다링 님, 고전을 재해석한 거라. 네네, 감사합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 그러면은 제가 어쨌건 일단 찾아보고요. 출판사에 연락을 한번 가능하다면 해 보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 생강님 감사합니다. 늦은 시간까지 함께 해 주셔서 생강님도 감사합니다. 네, 참 오늘 하루 종일 이 생각을 하고 좀 지낼 것 같아요. 오늘 이런 데미안에서 읽은 이 부분들, 무의식의 세계, 그러니까 무의식이라는 게, 전 사실 무의식이라는 단어를 별로 좋아하지 않거든요. 그건 무의식이 아니라 깊은 내면의 의식이라고 생각을 하는 편이라서. 근데 어쨌건 이 책에서 말하는 그 내용과 제 스스로의 어떤 그런 내면의 음 삶 뭐 이런 거를 오늘 한번 자연스럽게 고민하게 될 것 같았습니다. 네, 만다랭님 말이 많았는데 소통 감사합니다. 고생하셨습니다. 아유, 감사합니다. 저 이렇게 네, 대화해 주시는 거 너무 좋아요. 물론 인제 꼭 막 대화를 저랑 해 주려고 부담은 안 가지셔도 되지만 이렇게 네, 글을 적어 주시고 여기에 제가 하는 말에도 막 코멘트 달아 주시고 이런 게 저한테 참 되게 너무나 감사한 연료가 되죠. 네. "말은 언제든지 많으셔도 된다." 그런 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 네, 어쨌건 오늘도 여러분 감사하고요. 이 시간이 여러분의 삶에 작은 쉼표가 되었으면 하는 바람입니다. 작은 쉼표라는 단어가 구독자분들 중 한 분이 언제 쓰셨던 표현인데 이게 너무 멋있어서 어 제가 그 이야기를 인제 지금 하네요. 네. 늦은 밤 주무셔야죠. 네. 다시 한번 감사하고요. 함께해 주신 여러분들 모두 감사하고 기다리신 여러분들 감사하고 지금 주무시고 계신 여러분들도 좋은 꿀잠을 자고 계시길 네, 그리고 꿈을 꾸고 계시다면 아름다운 꿈을 꾸고 계시길 바라겠습니다. 네, 만다링님 저야 너무 즐겁습니다. 전부 답해 주시지 않아도 되어요. 좋은 하루 되세요. 네, 감사합니다. 저도 웬만하면은 전부 답해 드리려고 하는데 가끔 이게 놓칠 때도 있더라고요. 네. 네, 어쨌건 아직 뭐 어차피 어 글이 막 많이 있는 것도 아니고요. 네. 어쨌건 네, 다시 감사하다는 말씀을 드리고 저는 이만 하루를 힘차게 지내 보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 소울님 잘 들었습니다. 오늘도 감사합니다. 네, 저도 감사하고요. 아유, 함께 계속 이렇게 해 주셔서 너무너무 감사합니다. 내일도 내일 드디어 금요일입니다, 여러분. 막판 스퍼트 잘 뛰시고요. 화이팅 하시고 발렌타인스데이인데 저보다는 익사이팅한 발렌타인데이가 되길 바라겠습니다, 여러분. 그럼 다시 한번 감사합니다. 좋은 밤 되세요. 내일 뵐게요.